Hello everyone, this is Clarence Over. Today I'd like to talk to you about kind of just sharing all the info I've learned about LEGO Star Wars, the Complete Saga, animation modding over the past couple years. So to get started, there's a couple different things you'll need. We're going to be, of course you obviously need an extracted copy of LEGO Star Wars, the Complete Saga. If you have the Complete Saga but don't quite know how to extract it, there are tutorials online. I'll leave you to figure that out. I'm not going to be covering that here today. So the other thing you're going to need is a hex editor program. So for that, I normally use HXD. You can also use another program called mhex. I'm not quite as familiar with it, but it's another hex editor. Probably a bit more powerful, but I'm not as familiar with it. And we're going to need some, key concept you're going to need to know about this is all of our numbers are going to be in hexadecimal, and they're going to be in little endian. You're not going to care too much about that, but it does kind of impact what values get read if it's not set right. So for instance, what reads here is 3C00. In little endian, that is actually a value of 003C. So and that translates to be a value of 60 in decimal. If we were to change it to big endian, our number changes. And so just make sure you got that set to little endian. If you're not quite sure about what hex is, so a normal number system that you're used to is a base 10 number system, so 0 to 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Hexadecimal, your digits count up to 15. So 0 to 15, so 16 in total. So after 9 comes A, B, C, D, E, and F. And if you're kind of wondering how that translates, so think about in base 10, the number 123 is 3 times 1, which is 10 to the 0, plus 2 times 10, so 10 to the first, plus 1 times 10 to the second, which is 100. So 100 plus 20 plus 3 is 123. And hex, that breaks down to in 11 times 1 plus 7 times 16. So 100, that ends up being, once again, 123 in decimal, but it is 7B in hexadecimal. And so if you see anything with what I'm working today that's like 0x, that is going to denote that the number is in hexadecimal. So here on, back to HXD, what I like to do is under View, I set my text encoding to be this DOS IBM ASCII. By default, I think it's on Windows, and you may have seen that's changed there. I like to have it on that DOS IBM ASCII just because it gives you a lot more info. It's a lot easier to tell there are changes in bytes down here in this section, which we'll be covering what all that means here in a bit. Alright, so next thing I'm going to kind of talk over is what are the actual animation files. So in your extracted copy of LEGO Star Wars, underneath your chars, so all your characters, scrolling down, I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff today with R2-D2 just as a pretty good example. So underneath R2-D2, we've got all of these .an3 files. Those are your animations. So, and that's actually what I got pulled up in here. With all of this, this is R2-D2's default idle animation. And what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to actually open up R2-D2 in a program called Gnosis. So I've already got that installed. Once again, all the programs you need can either be found in the description for anything that I'm releasing, or if it's someone else's tool, you can find a link to it in the LEGO Star Wars mod, and actually it's the TT Games LEGO modding Discord. So we're going to wait a second while this loads in. Here we go. So this is our R2-D2. What I like to do as I'm opening stuff up is I hit this button a couple times till I get to the highest number in here, so 3 out of 3, and I turn on this little red skeleton because that shows you the skeleton of the model. I'm going to go under Tools and Data Viewer underneath Model 3, Bones, And this gives us a list of every bone within the model. So a character model within LEGO Star Wars is made up of a series of bones. So R2D2 tilt head, middle foot, leg, foot, panel opener, whatnot, right, interface, right leg, right foot, left leg, and left foot. And so these little joints here are actually what the animation file tells to move. So I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe X is generally speaking supposed to be red, so X, Y, and then Z for the blue, with Y being the green. And so there's a couple different concepts. So there's translation, which this really isn't a great place to do it, but translation is going to be, shifting in a horizontal kind of movement in 3D space. And then there's also going to be rotation in 3D space, which is going to be your pitch, your roll, and your yaw. So your pitch is going to be tilting, forward and backwards. Think of a plane pitching down or pitching up. Your roll, which I don't know that I can do on here, but roll is going to be, tilting to the right and tilting to the left, once again, like you're on a plane. And then a yaw is going to be actually twisting. So think kind of this maneuver. That is going to be your yaw. And so if you hear those terms come up, it's, once again, it's your pitch, forward and backwards. Roll is going to be roll left and right. And then yaw is going to be like you're turning, just think about turning in a circle like a merry-go-round. So I'm going to go ahead and close out Gnosis for now. So it's not necessarily a strict thing you have to do the animation modding, but it does help if you want to take a reference to the skeleton as far as what you're actually moving. So here I've got a Excel file that's kind of breaking out every single bit of data that's within the idle file. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking through that here in a second. Alright, so this is our R2D2 idle file, and once again here it is in HXD, and so you can see there's a couple major sections. So this section here is what I call the header. So all these names are just kind of things I've come up with, so if better names come along eventually, then change them as necessary. So, but this section here is what I call the header. Then this section will be what I call static data. This is a skeleton matrix. Then down here, I think it's only this far, is what I call the movement header. This is all the, I believe it's that far in his. This is all your moving data. So this actually handles any parts of the animation that actually move throughout the animation. And then this is what I call the footer. And so all that can be seen in here as well. And this actually breaks it down a little bit further. So I'm just going to leave this kind of here for now, and I'll talk through what all this is, but I think the best way to describe it is with this Excel file. So here is, all the data. This is all the raw hex values. So this is just kind of a straight copy from HXD. And into here, so kind of see where it came from. So on the top level, once again, we got our headers. Then all of this data is actually pointers. So a pointer is essentially a piece of data that quote unquote, points to another bit of data. So here we go, this 000001 BC, 000001 BC. So if we take a look, 0001 BC points to this data right here. So there's our headers, so static values, all this here in yellow, the matrix, all this in light green, movement parameters, movement data, and then our footer. So our header is kind of somewhat standard for every single animation will start off with this. So it always starts off with for INA. This, I think, changes if like you're looking at other games, but for today we're only talking about LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga. Following that is your number of bones. So OC in this case, which is decimal value of 12. So this R2D2 has 12 bones. And when you look at that, 0 to 11, so 12 bones in total. Then this frame rate and number of frames, said those got a question mark, but those control something about when the animation, I believe, starts and kind of stops. I could be wrong in those, though it's said it's still kind of up in the air. There's a lot of stuff I don't yet know. I am planning on doing a follow-up video once I've been able to, answer some of these question marks. Following that is question mark number of frames. Oh, actually, I told you that. 4 times number of moving bones. This is a weird one, but essentially for every value that kind of changes throughout the course of animation, this is 4 times however many of those changing values there are. Don't know why. Following that is our delay. So in a normal animation that you'll see just in normal gameplay, this is always 0. But like in a cutscene, that may be a different value. All this data here is always 0, but it does some stuff in cutscenes. Don't quite know what. This next thing at OX16, this is sometimes 0, sometimes it's not. Not sure why. Once again, more stuff that's just zeros. Then it's followed by, 2 sets of 4 bytes where no idea what this data does, but everything kind of breaks if it gets messed with. So I just don't touch that. Then we get into our pointers. So our movement parameter pointer. So that is this, as I mentioned earlier, this 1BC that points to kind of, it's the movement parameters, which said I'll get into that tab when I get there, but that kind of controls the scale and the offset of everything that changes throughout an animation. Static data pointer is actually the next section we're going to come to. Then we've got our skeleton matrix pointer, our movement data pointer, and then our footer pointer. Then another whole block of zeros, and then beyond here, this is optional, but you'll often see that this has the name of the animation. So in, idle.an3, 4964.6c65 is idle in ASCII. And then that just gets followed by a whole bunch of zeros up until we hit our static data pointer at 5C, which is right here. Boom. And I will say on cutscenes, like the embedded animations within cutscenes, this AN3 name is, I believe that is always just skipped or just omitted, so that's just zeros. So our static data. So each animation has, these are values which can be kind of shared across many different bones or nodes within the animation. And so just think of it kind of as an array of 2-byte numbers. So, this will say this is index 0, index 1, 2, 3, and so on. Remember, if you're in like computer stuff, numbers start at 0. So 0 to 12, there are 13 in total. And once again, this is little endian. So this 1217 is 1712, 41AB. Whatnot. Here's how that converts into just a normal decimal number. And this is what those values kind of interpret to. And I'll cover this more when we get to the next section, but the skeleton matrix value. So in here, there's a whole bunch of numbers, 10, 11, but back to 10, 12. And those correspond to each of these. So, index 0 is a value of 0010, index 1, 0011, 2, 0012, and so on. Alright, so now we're on to the skeleton matrix. This area is kind of the meat and potatoes of the animation. So for every single bone within the character, so once again, R2-D2, tilt, head, middle leg, middle foot, every single one of those is represented here in this matrix. And for every single bone, there are 9 2-byte values. And those correspond to the translation in the X, translation in the Y, translation in the Z. So once again, that is your position in 3D space. And this is all relative to the previous bone. So if we take a look on here, we can say head is connected, its parent is the tilt. So any changes you make to the tilt will impact the head because it's the parent of it. And same thing, your left foot parent is left leg. So any changes to the left leg will impact the left foot, and so on. So translations in your X, your Y, and your Z, followed by your rotation about the X, the Y, and the Z, and then followed by the scale in the X, Y, and Z axes. And so that, once again, that looks like this. So each, super bolded area is one bone, broken down into your translations, rotations, and scale. And so I've actually just broken out the first 3 bones, so R2-D2, the tilt, and the head. And so this kind of shows how each of them are. And as I mentioned back on the static data, so an 0001 points to this first value in the static data table. So you can essentially say this equals 1712. This is equal to 41AB. And it kind of just keeps on going throughout here. And then another kind of key note is that there is essentially a 0 value or a default value within these animations. It's often this first value, but it's not always. This can be just a very common value. So your X, say for instance, your X here and your Z here and all of your rotations for R2-D2, those are all pointing to static index 0. So that's kind of your default value. Same thing on the tilt. You got a whole bunch of the default value. And then your scales also often have a common value, but not necessarily the default value. And so that's here at, position number 2, OX0012. So that is going to be this FFFE, which is a very, very high number, almost to the limit. So that's how those run out. And once again, here we go. We're now on R2-D2's head. So, default in the X, another value for the Y, default in the Z, then we got, here we go, what is it? 1, 2, 3. So we've got something's here is happening in the X, then once again, default for the Y and the Z. So this here implies this 006, and a value of 0006 means a changing, node. And so if we take a look at that, rotation about the x-axis, take a look in here for the head, rotation about the x-axis for R2-D2 will be, I'm going to say it's yawing, so it's going to be turning like a seesaw, or turning like a merry-go-round about that x-axis. And if you know R2-D2's idle animation, that's what the head is doing, is it is, spinning like a merry-go-round about that x-axis. And so that's what a value of 06 means, is that means this value is not static, this value will be changing throughout the animation. And then this, similar thing just repeats for the rest of the skeleton matrix, where you've got either a value's at a default value or it's a static value in here. And the reason I chose R2D2 for this tutorial is that he only has a single rotating or changing value, which is this 106 for the yaw of the head. Alright, now we are on to the movement parameters. So just for reference, when we get back here, back on the main screen, this is this section of data right here. So these movement parameters, there is one block of these for every single moving node that is present here in the skeleton matrix. So we only have one in this animation, so there is only one here in the movement parameters. So the first 4 bytes correspond to the scale, and the second 4 bytes correspond to the offset. So I haven't been able to exactly narrow these, like actually find out what value is equal to what value. So integer and floating are, how those numbers actually translate based on, standards, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how they work within the game. But what I can show you, and I'll be showing you later, is, as this number changes, the scale of the changes within the moving value. So for the same, that's a good way to put this. For every value here in our movement data, these are all your kind of positions. The scale will change, for any set of numbers, the scale will increase or decrease how far that can move, and the offset will change the initial position. And so this will make more sense when I demonstrate changing these later, but just keep that in mind. This first 4 bytes is your scale, second 4 bytes is your offset, and if you had more moving nodes within, like for a animation, then this first 8 is going to be the first node that moves in the matrix, then your next 8 is going to be the next node that moves, and so on until every single one is covered. Onto our movement data. This is kind of a lot of unknowns, but also some of the most important data. So every one of these is a keyframe. And so this first byte is going to be the actual kind of value, or in this case, because we're rotating the position or the yaw at that keyframe, and then the other 3 bytes somehow correspond to blending from one position to the next. So here on this chart, you can actually see this is the position of R2D2's head rotation at any given time, and that is all of these data. And each of those, so keyframe 1, 2, or keyframe 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, that's your position. That somehow corresponds to the blending. So we need more research into this, but that is kind of the basics of it. And I'll actually demonstrate it later. If you invert these numbers, the blending values can stay the same for an inverted value, and it will actually just work perfectly backwards. And I'll demonstrate that here in a bit. The last kind of bit of data is your footer. And so don't think of this as a number per se, think of it as an array of bits. So for instance, this 42 is not, 42 in hex, which is, what's that in decimal? Hex 42. 42 in hex is going to be 66 in decimal. We don't want to think of this value here as 66. We actually want to think of it as this 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0. And basically every place there's a 0 or a 1 is something that is either going to be true or false for that bone. So each of these corresponds to a bone, once again in order. So that'll be R2D2, tilt, head, and whatnot. And so you don't want to think of these as a number. You want to think of them as an array of zeros and one, and that is going to be something that's either true or false, depending on the exact settings for what you're trying to do. And unfortunately, we don't know much about what each 1 or 0 actually means quite yet. But that is what those numbers are. Alright, so with all of that information covered, let's go ahead and try to actually mod a animation file. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go ahead and open up the R2D2, and just for today to make things kind of apparent, I already did this, so this is what R2D2's text file normally looks like. And I'm going to go ahead and I copy and pasted that over to R2Q5, who normally doesn't look like this, but the important thing is down here where it's action idle, this used to say anim start. This is the animation that it runs whenever this action takes place. So whenever idle occurs for R2Q5, we're going to want to run idle underscore mod. If you take a look at our character file, hey, we've got idle underscore mod. So that's going to be the file we actually modify to run stuff. And so we can see right now they are exactly identical. So what do we want to actually modify for that though? So I think we should take R2D2's head and make it higher up on his body. So what we're going to do is bone number 3, so bone 2, which is the third bone. We take a look in here, so we've got bone 0, bone 1, bone 2. And so that is going to be this 1, 3, that's a static data. So let's just go ahead, go open up HXD, idle mod, and so we can once again see that, okay, let's find out where our stuff is. So we're going to want to look at the skeleton matrix pointer. So that is going to be the data at 2C is our skeleton matrix pointer. So we go in here, our data at 2C is our skeleton matrix pointer. So that is going to be 0076. So we're going to go to 0076. So this is the start of our skeleton matrix. And we're going to want to count out to the third bone. So, and we know each has 9 sets of 2 bytes. So that's 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that is bone 0. And so we can say then that is bone 1. And so this is the bone that we care about. And we can say, okay, translation X, translation Y. So, okay, we want static data number 1, 3. And we know that because it's non-no6, it's going to be in static data. And so we take a look. Where's our static data start? Our static data is the value at 2, 8. At 2, 8, so that is our static data pointer. So at 005C is where our static data starts. 005C, that is the start of our static data. And so we can say, okay, that is static data, that's static data 0, which corresponds to a 1, 0. So that's 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. So this data right here corresponds to R2D2's head height. And we are lucky in this case, this 0013, that is only ever present right here in this matrix. So nothing else shares this data. If, another thing, let's say the left leg's height also was a 1, 3, changing this value would also change the left leg height. But in this case, we're lucky it only does the head. So we're on idle mod. We are on these 2 bytes. It is little endian. So what that means is that this is going to be the most significant byte. This is the least significant byte. So changing this will have a lot more impact than changing this will. So let's just change that from a 2.7 to, let's say, a 4.7. We're going to go ahead and save that. And let's hop into LEGO Star Wars and see what that does. So as I load in, you may notice I'm not going to have to go through the cantina or anything. I have modified some of my level files so that as soon as I load a game, it's going to open up straight into kind of my modding area just to make things quick for myself. Y'all may also see that I do not have 100% on game 1. That's just a artifact of modding shenanigans breaking the percent counter. That used to be a 100% file. We're going to log in. I'm going to start up as R2Q5. And as you can see, they have the exact same animation, except R2Q5's head is way off his body. And that, once again, is a result of us changing that static value, which controls the height of R2Q5's head in the idle mod animation. So as he's moving, he's using the normal R2 moveset, but when the idle happens, everything's synced up, everything's the same, except that static data is different. And that happens from us changing this 27OC to be 47OC. So that is how you kind of change static values within LEGO Star Wars Complete Saga. Now let's say you want to change a static value, but that number is actually one of the, isn't unique. So for instance, let's say we want to change the let's say we want to change the Z position of R2's left leg. So if we take a look at that, that'll be the third value of the left leg. So if we just say, let's go from backwards, so that's his left foot. That should be his left leg. Let me just double check my numbers. So that's left foot. So there we go. So that's his left leg. So this here corresponds to his left leg Z position. And so if we take a look at it, just a quick note, the translation of any axis, for instance, his left leg, the translation is based off of the axis of the parent. So if we say R2D2, Z is backwards. So left leg, his Z is also backwards. But say, for instance, his head, for him, X is down for his head, but it is actually, he is positive on the Y because it's a transform from tilt. So R2's head Y position is based off of the parent, the tilt's Y axis. But R2D2's head rotation is based off of the head's axes. So I wanted to clear that up. So R2D2's left leg Z is this byte here, but that's the 1.0, which is shared all over the place. So if we were to change that, then things would start breaking everywhere. So what we want to do is we want to add in a new static data to control this. And so what we can do is right now there is as many as C, so I think that's 12 static data so far. That might be 13. Let's go ahead and count because we're going to want to add it to the end of the current list. So let's just start. We got 1.0, 1.1, that's 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1.9. Then that is 1A, 1B, and 1C. So we have up to 1C. So the new data we're going to want to be at value of 1D. So let's go ahead and just get back up to it. So there's his left leg. So that's X, Y, Z. So we're going to change that to be a 1D to point to the data once we add it. So let's go ahead and add that data now. So we're going to want to add in 2 bytes after the static data, but before the matrix. So I'm just going to copy paste to make it easy on myself. Just going to copy paste. It's going to give me a warning that's going to change the file size. That's okay. We understand that. And let's just give it some value. Let's just say 3333. Sure, why not? So that is our new static data. and our leg is going to point to that. Our leg Z position is going to point to that data. However, because we added data here, our offsets are no longer correct. So let's go ahead and fix those. So let's start with our movement parameter pointer, which is at 2, 4. So our movement parameter pointer right down here used to be at 1 BC. It is no longer at 1 BC. It is now at 1 BE. So let's go ahead and change that over. Let's see what's next. Our static data pointer did not actually change because that is before we added that. So that is the same. Then we've got our skeleton matrix pointer. That changed. So it used to be at 7, 6, which is here. It is now at 7, 8. Then we've got our movement data, which used to be at 1C4. 1C4. It is now, we added 2 bytes, so it's now at 1C6. And this should probably be our footer. Yep, which used to be at 208. So that used to be here. It is now at 20A. So 20A. And let's go ahead and save that. And that should take care of everything. So if we go ahead and load into Lego Star Wars, get that started up, we should see that the previous change to the height of the head, the y-axis value of the head, should still be in effect, as well as we should see the left leg z-axis, which is the forward and back, should be different as well. Let's go ahead and load in. And go and get started. Enter drop in player 2. And as we can see, his left leg is forward as compared to his right leg, as compared to R2 as well. And so we have just successfully added a new static data value. And I will say a little caveat. I did try to do this with the rotation of the left leg, and I was unable to get that to work. I believe that may have something to do with the footer data, where if one of those bits isn't set properly, it may prevent rotations from occurring. That's just a guess for right now, but I was unable to get static rotations to work without changing anything in the footer. So just keep that as a kind of footnote. One other concept that I'm not necessarily going to demonstrate, but I would like to go over, is the effect of the default value on other numbers. So in this animation, the default value is, this 0010, which is 1712. And what's important to realize is that that kind of acts as the 0 point for static values. So anything greater than that number is going to be positive, and anything less than that number is going to be negative. So if we take a look at R2D2, for instance, both the left leg and the right leg are, parent is R2D2. So one of those is going to be along the positive x a certain amount of distance, and the other leg is going to be along the x-axis, once again in a negative direction, but the same value. And so what that looks like is his left leg has a value is at 1C, and his right leg is a value at 1A. So his left leg is a value of 2E25, and his right leg is a value of 0. If we take a look at that, both of those are equidistant from the 1712. So, digit of 1% off, but in any case, the x So the position for the left leg and the position of the right leg are equidistant from the 0 point, which is the default value. So that is something to keep in mind as you are changing static values within the animation file. So I have gone ahead and reset the animation to be just the default idle, because now we're going to start messing with some of the moving bits of R2's animation. So for starters, we're going to look at the movement parameters with the scale and the offset. So if we take a look over here, header, idle, we're going to be looking at these bits of data, which is the movement parameters, which is basically for every bone that moves. So within this matrix here, any value that is a value of 0.6, so for instance, in this case, our rotation of the head, every single value that is like that will have a block of 8 bytes for every single one of those. And it's going to be 4 bytes for the scale and then 4 bytes for the offset. So what that looks like over in HXD, it's going to be that followed by that. So once again, this first block of data is our scale. So, and because it's little endian, this is our most important byte. So we're going to change that from 3B to, let's just say, 5B. Save, and let's go ahead and see what that does in the game. Oh, and it did not like that value. Probably means something somewhere is getting beyond the max range. So let's go ahead and close out of that. Oops. And let's try it again with a smaller number. So let's try, it was 3, let's try 1. See what that gives us. So some of this stuff is, guess and check, where it doesn't necessarily work the way, you don't have enough information currently about what the game does to make everything work the way we expect it to all the time. So hopefully with more digging, people can figure out how to, do something custom from scratch, but until that day, it's a bit of guess and check. So here we go with a value of 1 to start that. And the R2 is still being unhappy about that. So we're going to go ahead and try and figure out what's going on. Alright, so figured out what was going on. We were trying to make too drastic of changes, and the game was really unhappy about that. So we went back a byte, and so instead of, this had been 3B, so 3 Bravo, Bravo Delta was the original, and so now we changed it to 3 Bravo Foxtrot Delta. So changing this from that to an F, and you can see the result in here. Our modded animation is turning further for each, individual action as compared to the original. So nothing in the keyframe data was messed with. This is all with that scale value in the movement parameters header. We have gone ahead and reset the scale back to the default value, and now we're going to mess around with our offset. So based on what we learned from the trial and error we did with that last test, let's go ahead and start messing with this byte. As remember, it is all 4 of these bytes, but if we mess with this one, it may make things just start breaking. So let's change this from 5.6 to, let's just make it 1.6 and see what we get from that. Go ahead and load it into the game. So is it all that obvious as far as what's changed? It's not, it's a little bit there, but let's see if we can increase that. So some more. So we had been at, what was that, what I say? I can't remember what we were at. Let's go ahead and make that Yeah, let's just change that from BF to BE, and just a small change. Well, still might be a bit large, but small change we can make on the largest byte, and see what effect that has on this. There we go. So, alright, so as we can see as I get these two lined up, the head is spinning at the same amount as the original animation, but it is starting at a different position if you compare R2 and I think it's RQ. Same amount of rotation, but the initial position is different between these two. This next section is probably the most interesting part of the animation file, but is also the part that I know the least about, where there's a lot of question marks that still need to be filled in. That is the moving data. So the animation is made up of a whole bunch of keyframes, and every keyframe has 4 bytes for every moving bone in the matrix. And once again, moving bone is an 06 in the skeleton matrix. So in this case, we only have 1 moving bone, so a keyframe is only 4 bytes. And so the keyframe, once again, I said it's 4 bytes. The first byte controls the position, which is all these here in yellow. The other 3 bytes controls something about how it's the information on how the animation moves from the current one to the next one. And that's not understood, but I can tell you if I make all of this 0, then the head will snap from position to position, and we will actually be seeing that as we go along. These numbers here are all centered at the value 7FFF. So that is essentially 0. Anything greater than that is positive. Anything less than that is negative. And so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to invert all of these values across 7F, so that way I can sort of demonstrate that if we flip every single one of these exactly opposite without changing any of the blending data, the animation works completely fine. We're going to go ahead and on here, I reset the scale and the offset parameters. So the value of 5.2 is going to be 2D away from the center, so we can just do plus 2D plus 7F gives us a value of AC. So I'll leave all those, AC, leave those as is, and I do actually have all the corresponding numbers written down, but let's, for just another example, we're going to say 90 minus 7F, 1, so 7F minus 1. It's going to be 6E. So instead of 90, we're going to be now 6E. 1, 2, 3. Now that's going to be 3, 7. Another 3, 7. Another 3, 7. From F6, we're going to turn into 08. FF is going to be 0. Another 0. 4, 1 turns into BD. FE, another FE, BD again, and then back to AC. So if we save that and we're going to go ahead and load into the game, you'll see the animation on the black R2 unit is going to be the normal, but exactly the opposite of the original R2 idle animation. And so that's with changing only that first byte of each keyframe for the moving, for the head rotation. And if you do have more than one moving bone in a key, so more than a single moving bone in an animation, then it's going to be, you know, moving bone 1. So in any keyframe, it's going to be moving bone 1, moving bone 2, moving bone 3, or whatnot. And once you go through all those, then you're going to start the next keyframe. So if we look at this, the head exactly the same but mirrored, and the blending works completely fine. And so as I said, the 3 bytes control something about how it gets from one state to another. And for fun, if I go ahead and I make all those zeros, let's see, starting there. So those are already zeros. Let's just make a whole bunch of zeros through here. We're going to see it just snap from position to position. Doo-doo. Oh, missed one. Couple more. Cool. So let's go ahead and pop back into game, and we can see what that does. Okay, and as you can see, without with all those numbers zeroed out, the head is kind of just jumping from one position to the next, but there's no sort of blending or uncontrolled, you know, in between states is not really defined at all. And just a quick note, I did kind of, if you look at this graph here, that is kind of mapping the position of the head as it goes along. But so the other numbers currently don't know what they do. The last bit of data is the footer, which isn't too well understood beyond that it is a bit field. So don't think of this as 42. Think of it as 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0. I believe this column is always going to be a 0, and I think this column may be as well, but that's about all I can say. Beyond that, you know, just maybe trial and error, more looking into it may figure something out, but those are bit fields to control some aspect of the animation. And each one of these corresponds to a single bone. So, you know, R2, tilt, head, whatnot, throughout all of them. And so that is kind of the animation file. Once again, everything and all that data was, this data here is the footer, which is the pointer that is there. So 0208 in this case. But that's all the information I can kind of share at this time for the LEGO Star Wars animation modding. I will go ahead and drop a link in the description to a bunch of any files that I have. This is all sort of the manual way of doing things. I do have some pretty horribly written Java code, which did help do some LEGO modding stuff. And I'll drop links to that, and someone else can make a better tool. It's not a good program by any case, but it does. Some parts of it work. So, and I'll also drop a link to the data kind of highlighting file for MHEX that I showed off at the very start of the video. And with all that said, hopefully y'all were able to figure out a bit more about animation, or know a bit more about animations now than when you started the video. Hope y'all have a great day, and if you ever are, you know, trying to do something with animation modding and it's not working out, try fiddling around with it for a bit, ask people in the Discord, and all else fails, feel free to @ me in the Discord, and if I get to you, great. If not, no hard, like, it's nothing personal. But have a good one.